Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. As I mentioned before, I went to the local comic book shop and I pretty much bought about everything in the 50-cent bin because I wanted to support a comic book shop and I wanted to see a bunch of new stuff. And as I've been going through the comics, I've kind of been constantly thinking to myself, well, is this worth making a video on? Should I make a video about this? And I've been giving a lot of thought to what kinds of books I want to do videos on, because a lot of them might be kind of really obscure, not something that maybe not a lot of people would be interested in. But a thought I've kept coming back to is that everything can be instructive. A bad children's book can be instructive. A good children's book can be instructive. A bad comic can be instructive. A good comic can be instructive, because you're looking at it for the purpose of gleaning information about how to tell a particular type of story or in a particular type of way. So kind of thinking through that has helped me decide that I'm cool doing even kind of like strange or unusual things, because this is kind of a weird channel and the application is always what's working, what's not working. So White Picket Fences, this is apparently like an ongoing miniseries that's set in the 1950s, sort of, monster stories, aliens. It's all the kind of tropes of 1950s era movies and Godzilla. All that is apparently real in this book. So this particular one is two full-length stories and one little short story, and each has a different illustrator. These three are apparently the creators of the whole miniseries. But first one's illustrated by Micah Ferrator. Second one's illustrated by Brian Mead. Third one has pencils by Tim Laddie and colors by Micah Ferrator. So this one made for a really interesting compare-contrast on the strengths and weaknesses of all three. And I want to talk about it because I learned a lot, and it's relevant to some of my theses. So one thing I've talked in the past on the Squirrel Girl artist who shall not be named is the uncanny valley. And I kind of used cartooning and realism as the two extremes where those two could mix to make an uncanny valley where it's neither cute nor realistic. It's just kind of creepy. But that is a real simplification, because you could obviously have all kinds of things in between cute and realistic. You could have kind of wonky. You could have those weird coloring book drawings I was looking at before. So this, I have a hard time describing this kind of drawing. My first thought was sort of Tim Burton-esque, sort of wonky, distorted people, but they still kind of look cool. I think the way to describe this is a cartoonist who's more interested in exaggeration than cuteness. Japanese chibi characters can be cute, but Hello Kitty isn't necessarily that expressive. Funko dolls aren't expressive at all, but they're technically, they have the basic things you'd think you'd need to have to be cute. Big heads, little eyes, kind of deformed baby-like proportions. But Funko dolls are so creepy. But this is not cute drawing, but it is cartoony and exaggerated drawing. And as I was watching, I was thinking, gee, is this uncanny valley? And I want to defend it for a couple reasons. Number one, the whole tone of the story is kind of a creepy horror story vibe, with kind of mummies and vampires and wolfmen. So actually kind of the creep factor of them being not quite human lends itself to the tone of the whole story. And two, there's a lot of sensibility to expression in Micah Ferrator's drawing. And this shows up in a lot of variety in how the bad guy interacts, how the kids interact, and I dug it. I think Micah Ferrator's weakness is his colors. Even though there's good unity, it's generally, every page is pretty much brown, green, blue, yellow, maybe a tiny bit of orange, but it stays in that realm. And one thing I'm thinking about is, unity of color is good because it provides balance. It helps everything fit. It'd be weird if you had one hot pink panel and then you just went back to this brown tone for the rest of it. You'd want that pink, if you had any pink, to feel like it belonged with the rest of the color. But the con of having a nice unified palette is you can get repetitive and too much into a da 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 da. So like this, like a wolf man shows up. If you're not going to use a bright red danger color at any point, if you're not going to use a bright red danger color for the wolf man showing up, when are you ever going to use bright red to create some intensity and create some impact? So I think what would help, Ferrator is to use color symbolically to heighten emotion at key moments. So it's good in the sense that it's well painted, it's well applied, good sensibility of light and shadow, but it's just a little bit too muddy brown consistently throughout. What I did, I mean, this is so wonky and weird, but it works. Models, I'm thinking about models. In animation, kind of on one extreme, you've got Disney animation, right? They sculpt every character out. They figure out what the character looks like from every angle. It's always on model. Every line has to be perfect. And then maybe on the other end of the animation spectrum, you'd have Ren and Stimpy, where the animators are deliberately exaggerating expressions or stretching and squishing the characters for a humorous effect. So the general tone of these stories in White Picket Fences is you've got your, three main boy characters and their teacher, Mr. Reason, and you identify them based on, their dress and their facial features and their hair color, but they're allowed to kind of like stretch and change. They go off model to heighten expression. And I think the really strongest interaction I saw was the interaction between Mr. Reason and the bad guy, Dr. Ferrier, I think. Yeah. So I want to find it. So the kid, Charlie sneaks in, and Dr. Ferrier is about to turn him into a monster. And there's this really great Wait, I gotta find it. There's this great interaction between Reason and Ferrier, where Ferrier is showing a variety of kind of disdainful expressions, but his body language and his face work together to create the effect. Here we go. All right. So he has an arched eyebrow and pursed lips, and not only that, he's also contorting his neck and leaning his head forward. Then he leans his head back and grits his teeth and looks to the side. Things that suggest that he's not just, giving a evil monologue. There's disdain in his voice, because I can see it on his face. And then this is the other one I was thinking about. So once again, an arched eyebrow, but the context is different. Now he's sneering a little bit. In the last one he was kind of leaning forward, and this one he's just sort of looking to the side as he grabs something. So there's a good sense of posing the characters like actors. And Eisner had a chapter on this in one of his texts. I'm just going to have to read my Eisner text with you guys sometime and just give you some of the big lessons I've learned from that. You should all have those 3 Eisner texts in your library if you want to make comics. They are the bomb. But so I'm just going to leave it there so I don't show too much. The short story has much better color, and it used. The idea is the kids each write an essay on what they want to be when they grow up, and they all have to do with space, but they're all slightly different. So Parker's is about constructing a suit that he can fly, and there's generally kind of an orangish tone to the whole thing. And Tommy dreams of being a baseball star in space, and there isn't a single color that unifies it, except maybe kind of purple and blues throughout, but it just overall has a darker vibe, and it's a bit more wonky. And then Charlie, who's supposed to be like the smart kid, he imagines, he doesn't want to do it when he grows up. He wants to immediately become like a space adventurer, like Spaceman Spiff, and there's a green vibe to everything. And there's also this interesting consistency of the composition, where white panel, then the dream sequence pushes forward, dream sequence, and then half circle with white at the end. So it's a nice, white is the real world, bright colors is the imaginary world, white is the real world again. And because it's consistent for all 3, boop, 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 it's that fairy tale rule of 3s. They're consistent, so they feel like they belong and they create a rhythm. Boom, 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 conclusion. And I think the conclusion has some of the artist's weakest drawing, because suddenly these 12-year-olds turned into 25-year-olds. But this was the weakest drawing. Generally, I actually quite liked most of the drawings in this. I thought this one of Parker was a pretty good drawing, and I'm pretty sure Parker here is maybe a reference to our boy Petey,
but definitely not as strong in his expressions. This is a very weak smile, I think. So who is that one again? I gotta get this right. Okay, so Brian Mead, I think, was the weakest of the three in terms of the underdrawing, but a better colorist. So the last one, Micah Ferrator is back doing colors. So same comment. The colors are muddy, they're consistently not that dynamic, and the pencils are by Tim Laddie. And what's really interesting to me is that Laddie seems to be consistent with the tone of this book in that it's kind of a wonky, off-kilter 1950s world, but still, all three have their own style, yet all three seem to blend together nicely into a single work, where these are different perspectives on the same batch of characters and the same little quaint town. This, I thought, had even stronger underdrawing because Ferrator had a lot of variety in his drawing and really good body language, but I feel like this overall had more depth, had more detail, had some really cool compositions. I dug this. All right, so the principal comes in and starts telling him about the new kid from Japan, Kenny, and then Parker, gets too excited and raises his hand and blurts out, and then gets embarrassed, and his facial features change, kind of normal head, weak chin, big head, for comedic effect. The drawing here emphasizes the joke of Parker's being a little teacher's pet and running his mouth, and they're having a laugh at his expense. This is another example of what I've been talking about before, that the humor of the drawing can reinforce the humor of the situation, where it can be hard to sell a gag that ordinarily would require actors vocalizing the lines. You need the visual language of the drawing to reinforce a gag and to make it funny. If his face isn't funny in that, and we don't get the expression that oops, he made an idiot of himself, then the joke doesn't sail. I had a little problem distinguishing some of the characters because of the way they were drawn, so I had to look for details like their dress or their hairstyle, and I think that was an example of the weakness of having such variety. So the strength of going off model is that you get variety and you get a lot of kind of freshness, a lot of originality. It's continually interesting, and you're continually having expressions exaggerated, body language exaggerated. The con of going off model is that because there isn't that much consistency, you can lose track of who's who and what's going on. So there are strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons to either having kind of the Disney, very careful line, very careful drawing, everybody has their facial features 100% correct style, and the wonky, off-kilter, stretching and squishing the characters as you need to. So the weakness of that was I kind of lost track of who this guy was as opposed to Mr. Reason. But I eventually figured it out. There's one really cool... Okay, this. I really dug this because they go inside the safe house to hide from the giant attacking beetles, and the gutters become the window that they are looking through. So it's an odd composition because he's standing in front of the grass here, and then you see the reflection on the panels here, and the boys are here, and then it changes back to panels again. So it works both as a gutter and as something that exists in the foreground in front of the characters. I just thought that was kind of, it was cool compositionally. It was a kind of funny, wonky thing they were doing with the convention, but it wasn't so outlandish that it was distracting me from the story too much. I noticed that it was kind of a cool little detail, but it didn't break me out of the world of the story because it's a detail from the world of the story. These expressions were really good, okay? Inquisitive, looking at the lizard. He's still inquisitive, but he's turned his head and he's kind of narrowed his eyes a little bit as he's talking. And now he's leaning his head forward and raising one eyebrow and smiling and looking directly at that same object. Really good. Like I said before, I'm not digging all the brown colors. If you're not going to have some bright colors for a giant Godzilla versus beetle fight, when are you ever going to have some really bright colors? But I dug the pacing of the story. I dug the expression and the emotion throughout the story, and I was really impressed by this because this is exactly what I'm looking for, and this is exactly what I keep seeing as lacking in the Marvel stories I'm reading is a lack of empathy. Oop, there went the lights. Turn on lights, turn on. Whatever. Anyway, this is a recommend. It's wonky. Maybe it's not your thing. There are some weak parts of the art, but in terms of learning about drawing and body language and expression, I am pleased with this, and I'm going to check out more. White Picket Fences. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. Still trying to turn on the lights. Failure, just like this whole channel. I love you guys. Catch you later.